Wayne Schwass played much of his distinguished AFL career under the crippling weight of clinical depression. He fought a silent battle throughout the 90s, a period that produced a premiership and 3 Best and Fairest awards. Welcome, Swatter.
Thanks, Mike.
We'll get back to the more meaningful side of this, your life story shortly, but first, you and I had what you might term an edgy relationship as player and reporter, didn't we?
Yeah, I think it probably came from the position of a lack of trust towards the media on my behalf, and perhaps may have been influenced by what my old man thought about some of your decisions.
A few times.
He's okay now.
Yeah, we're good. No, we're good.
Yeah.
I'm big with the Schwass family now.
Well, you mature as you get a bit older.
Look, I think I'm prepared to say I think I was harsh on you. I probably thought you were overshadowed by the names that you were playing with. I mean, at North Melbourne in the 90s, we're talking names like Carey, McKernan, Stevens, Archer, Bell and King and others. But you interrupted Wayne Carey's Best and Fairest run with 2 in a row and a premiership in 1996. It's a celebrated CV you've got.
Well, I appreciate it now, Mike. Look, I played with a really good team that had a lot of great players, and none better than the bloke that I regard as the greatest player ever to have played, in the modern era certainly, but perhaps in the entirety of the game. And I appreciate that. It's nice to be thought of that way, but the reality is that I was a part of a very good football team during that period.
I was interested, you and I had a long discussion for a story for the Herald Sun 7 years ago now. I remember you saying to me then that you thought you were a more consistent performer and probably a better team player in Sydney, where you played 98 games, than you were at North Melbourne.
Yeah, I got no doubt.
Why?
Absolutely no doubt. I think that I was a more spasmodic player when I was at North. The difference between my good games and my not so good games, the gap was larger. Whereas one of the interesting things about moving to Sydney, and I'd never had any intention of playing for another Melbourne-based team when I decided that I was going to leave North. One of the real benefits of actually moving to Sydney was that I actually fell in love with the game again. By the time I left North, I'd fallen out of love with the game and I needed change, and went to Sydney, and I rediscovered what it was that I really enjoyed about the game, and it's just a fantastic game. And that connection again allowed and motivated me to become a better trainer, a better prepared player, a better prepared person, and I think my results showed that in my time at Sydney.
You had 5 years in Sydney?
Yeah.
Yeah. It's now, your time at North didn't finish as well as you would have liked, did it?
No. A lot of that was my own doing.
1997 final series.
Yep.
You and Glenn Archer get yourselves rubbed out. The club, the Kangas, get eliminated from the premiership race in the preliminary final.
Yep.
Dennis wasn't happy, was he?
No. He was very unhappy. and rightly so. I mean...
Was it reckless? What did you do in that final against Geelong?
Stood on Carl Steinford, who was tagging me that night.
Deliberately stood on Carl Steinford?
Yeah. And this is why I think that I was actually a more consistent player at Sydney. I learnt to deal with taggers in a better way, whereas at North I was very short-tempered, had a short fuse, and the opposition teams knew that. And in that particular game, he obviously warned me pretty closely, and I didn't know how to control my frustrations, and I did something that I still live to regret this day. I mean, the reality is that your vice-captain gets 4 weeks, and the shin boner of the century cops 2. We lose by 31 points. Injuries to McKernan and Carey during that prelim final against St Kilda. I'm not sitting here saying that we would have won, but you'd like to think with Arch and myself playing two experienced players that the result may have been different. I don't know if we would have won, but I regret that. I regret every time.
Let's relive the moment, mate. What happened?
Don't we? Well, which part?
The Steinford exchange.
Taggers annoyed me at that stage, and as I said, I didn't know how to cope with that, and he happened to be underneath me. I saw him there, and I just made a decision to stand on him.
Which part of his anatomy?
The groin area.
Intentionally?
Yep.
You and Arch watched the preliminary final together?
Yep.
You're in the race as the soldiers leave the field.
Yep.
Field Marshal Pagan is looking for both Archer and Schwass.
Yep.
One of you disappeared. Which one were you?
Oh, the bloke that's the shin boner of the century. Arch was with me when the siren sounded, and Dennis came out of the box, and you could just see steam was coming out of his ears, and he made a beeline for us. And I just said to Arch goes, let's go out in the ground or let's go in the room. So I said, no, stay in the race, because once he locks onto us, he'll give us all he's got, and then once he moves into the room, he's dealt with us, and he'll move on to the other guys. And I kept saying to myself, I'm all right because Archer's there. And anyway, Dennis gets to the bottom of the race and just starts to unload. Just one of his best, in fact, I'd say his best that I ever got. And just kept going. And I just kept thinking at some stage he's got to move on to Arch. And then just as Dennis is getting closer, I sort of look past Dennis and I look past the players and there's Arch at the back of all the players. Dennis walked into the rooms and gave us 15 of his best. And it was a long, probably well-deserving spray.
You've had an association with Dennis that takes you back to your teenage years. Tell us about that relationship. Lots of you who came through with him have sort of revere him in the impact he's had on your life, but he did scare you too, didn't he?
I don't know if he scared me. He certainly came from a position of fear and intimidation, especially early days. When you're a 17-year-old kid moving down from country Victoria, I've seen grown men cry with some of the things that Dennis has said to them, but that's what we got. I mean, we were indoctrinated into that. So by the time that Dennis came to coach us as a senior group, we were well aware of his philosophies and how he coached and the way that he coached. So I wouldn't say that he scared us. And it's probably only since I've retired and I've reflected on my career and the influence of coaches through my journey that I now appreciate some of the lessons that Dennis has instilled in me. And I work in business now, and a lot of the things that I put in practice are the things that he taught me as a kid growing up.
Give me an example.
Discipline, sacrifice, attention to detail, being structured in whatever you do. The only thing I had issue with in regards to Dennis's coaching was the way the messages were delivered sometimes. And I say that with the benefit of hindsight and hopefully maturity, that I was dealing with a very private issue, being depression, in a very testosterone-filled environment, when I would have liked a cuddle as opposed to being hit over the head with a long stick, but that was the way it was, and I chose not to say anything, so I don't blame Dennis.
Dennis wasn't privy to your situation at that point?
Look, I've talked to Harry Youngley's a very dear and close friend of mine. He counselled me and held my hand the whole way through that entire 11-year process.
With Dennis's knowledge or not?
I think Dennis had a very limited amount of knowledge, and at the time I'm glad that he only had a limited amount of knowledge, because I didn't want Dennis to know. I was petrified of my coach, my fellow coaches, assistant coaches, staff, and more importantly my teammates and the club and the supporters. I lived in fear for 15 years of people finding out.
Is that because you had that archaic, now seen to be the archaic thinking that there's something weak about you if you've got a psychological problem?
Yeah, there was definitely a fear of it being seen as a weakness. I lived in denial for a hell of a long time, Mike. I really did.
When did it manifest itself first to you?
1993. I was diagnosed with depression.
So it was done medically?
Yeah, it was. I remember driving home one night after training, pulled up at a set of traffic lights. I was living in South Yarra with my fiancée, now my wife. Pulled up a set of lights and I started crying. And I grew up in an environment, I've never seen my dad cry. The only time I've ever seen my dad cry, and I love my dad dearly, and you know that, was when his mum passed away. And I saw that as, well, men don't cry. So I assumed that sort of attitude. And then I started crying this night, and this led to 2 weeks of being not able to control this overflow of emotion. And at the end of the 2 weeks, my wife said, there's something wrong and we need to go and sit with Harry and get an understanding of what's going on. And he diagnosed me with depression, and that was the beginning of a 15-year journey. So
were you reluctant? I mean, the normal male thing about I don't need treatment?
Yeah, I was sat with Harry, prescribed medication. Harry put a lot of work into getting me in front of male psychologists, and it didn't work. It didn't work because I didn't want it to work. I drank a lot of alcohol to the point where I'd say I was bordering on being an alcoholic. And in retrospect, I did that because I had no skill. I didn't have an understanding of how to deal with it properly. And I think what underlined all of my decisions for 6 years when I did nothing to help myself was that I lived in fear constantly, daily, of what people like you would think in the media, of what my teammates would think, family, coaches, my own club supporters, and worse than that was the opposition supporters. So I spent 15 years pretending to everybody else that I was okay, and it's one of the biggest regrets that I have, because the whole time I did that, I wasn't concentrating on what I needed to do to get healthy and well. And what I speak about publicly now to people, if they're in that position, don't make that mistake. You know, if I had my time again, I'd put my hand up with the benefit of hindsight and being comfortably in my own skin now. I made a terrible mistake, but that was a conscious decision because I was fearful of losing those things that were important.
Were you captain of the North Under-19 team?
Yeah.
So there you are, and you won the flag, didn't you?
Yep.
Okay, and you've got all this self-doubt and self-loathing. Did you find that was incompatible?
No, because when you suffer with a mental illness, the sole purpose, in my experience, of mental illness is to erode all your self-worth and confidence. I had a reasonably good career at North, achieved some great team and individual performances and accolades, but at the same time, hand on heart, I hated who I was.
What was the low point, Wayne?
The countless times I drove home and thought about an option that would have dire consequences. And
Let me remind you of that. This is one of your quotes from our interview in the Herald Sun. You said, "I was living every boy's dream, but there were times when I just thought it was better not to be here than to be here."
Yep.
Now, were you as close as that? Were you wrestling in your own mind and your heart about whether it was worthwhile staying on the planet?
Yep. Daily.
I can't envisage what that means. I mean, how desolate and low must you be to be in that situation?
Yeah, you're doing something that 99% of the male population would give their right arm to do. You're getting really well paid at the time, relative to the money that was in the game at the time. You don't have to work. You're playing a great game. You're playing the world's great game with great mates and great friends, and there's a lot of things that come with that, and there's every reason to be happy and comfortable. But as I've said thousands of times since going public and talking publicly continually, you can be the richest person in the world, biggest house, best car, not have to worry about anything financially. It's not about material possessions. It's about the way that somebody views themselves. And for that 6-year period from 93 to 99, I didn't do what I needed to do to get well. I drank excessively. I didn't take medication. I didn't listen to the advice that I was given by Harry and my fiancée at the time. And quite simply, I didn't have the skills. And when you don't have the skills and knowledge to understand what it is that you're first dealing with, and then start to do things differently so that you begin to regain control of your life again, I'd lost control. Couple that with not having the skills, not having the understanding, doing something that only adds to the depressive illness that you're dealing with, which is drinking alcohol, put me in a really difficult situation.
But how could you play such good footy in such a tough competition, drinking the booze that you were drinking at the time? Because you got wasted a lot, didn't you?
Yep. And if you ask most of the North players through the 90s, we played very hard on the field and we played very hard off the field. We played 14 Friday nights, Mike.
Yeah, I was going to take you to the Friday night.
Not good for your liver.
That wasn't good for... I mean, it was good for the North Melbourne Footy Club, but it wasn't good for the lifestyle of the players, was it?
Oh, look, I think it...
You had the weekend to just go crazy.
And we did.
Yeah.
We did. We would play Friday nights and we would finish Sunday night at some stage, Monday mornings. But come Monday, you'd never meet a team that trained harder.
Yep.
And I've got to say, in '96, we had Peter Bell, Glenn Freeborn, Matthew Capuano, Corey McKernan, Stuart Anderson. We had 5 kids in our group. And because we were so social, it was not uncommon for 40 North players to be out, both seniors and reserves. And the Pied Piper was Duck.
Yeah.
He got out his flute and we followed. But in a really good way, yes, we probably socialised too much. But what that actually did for those kids, they felt part of that group. They felt a big part of that group. And if you look at the 96 final series, the contributions of those 5 players were significant because it took pressure off the other more experienced players. They played a really important role. And I firmly believe, because they were made to feel such a big part of that group socially, that transcended onto their performance during the year.
Is the solution to clinical depression in your case, does it happen overnight or is it a long process or is it medicinal? Tell me about that.
It's some of that, all of that, maybe none of that. What I would say is the longer someone leaves addressing the issue, the harder and longer it's going to take to unravel the mess and then begin to deal with it appropriately. It took me 15 years to overcome it.
Wow.
And I've got to say, one of the greatest things that I did to begin the process of reclaiming control of my life was to sit down with you and talk about it openly. Because for 11 years prior to that, I lived a lie. I basically lived every day pretending to everybody, people such as yourself, people that didn't know me, that I was okay. And once I got home, I was not. I was in a hell of a way.
That was a very brave thing of you to do. You laid yourself bare in that interview, double page in the biggest selling paper in the country, about you fighting your demons, didn't you?
I did. And the reason I made the decision eventually, because I thought about it 12 months earlier, and to be honest, I shit myself because I was again worried about what everyone thought. And that's what you do. You're constantly thinking. And when I say constantly, for those people who've never dealt with this type of issue, they may not understand it. But for those people that have lived it, are living it, or will live it into the future, they'll understand that this is an insidious illness that lives with you every second of the day. And it's hard to find a break in this negative self-cycle. But what actually helped me get over the issue of what other people will think is Nathan Thompson.
Well,
Tomo,
so when Tomo was at Hawthorn.
When Tomo went public, it gave me an enormous amount of inspiration, and I have admired him and I've told him this, that I thank him for his story, because it gave me the courage to actually make a decision. I've had enough of living this lie. I want to actually do something to turn my life around.
Now, I'm not trying to point score here, but you rang me about to do that story, did you not?
Yep.
So you were ready in your own mind.
Yeah, but it was important to me, and I talked to the key people around me at the time. It was important to me that I wanted to pick the person that I wanted to tell my story to. And I felt that of all the people that worked in the media, I felt that you were the person for my own reasons.
Thank you. Did you take the problem to Sydney with you?
Yep. And
so how did you deal with it there when you're away from Harry Unglick and you're away from your sort of the network of support that you had indirectly?
There was two things. One, the strain that it put on my relationship at the time got to the point where my wife Rachel said, in Sydney, you do something about it or it's finished. And second to that was, I'm not quite sure what an epiphany is, but I think I may have had one.
A moment in your life, yeah.
It was a moment of almost as if the light switch finally went on. I was 29 years of age, not coping, still drinking, but not as much. And it was at a training session, and I can remember being at the Randwick end. Adam Goods was behind me and Jude Bolton was in the middle of me, in front of me. And I just thought, shit, I've wasted 6 years of my life. I'm in the same place I was 6 years ago when I was diagnosed. I haven't done anything about it. I need to do something about it for myself, for my relationship. I went off the ground, walked straight into the doctor's room, and Tommy Cross, who was the understudy to Nathan Gibbs, the Sydney doctor, I walked in, I said, Tommy, I'm clinically depressed, I need some help.
Wow.
And that was the beginning of 4.5 years of hard work with a unbelievably good lady psychiatrist. Medication, lifestyle changes, bit by bit, got it back.
After the break, the duck and plugger. Let's talk about a couple of blokes you played with, and you'll guess these. We'll start in chronological order. Wayne Carey first.
Yep.
Tell us about life around Wayne Carey.
The amount of times where we needed something and he gave us something. He was the greatest player I've ever seen by a comfortable distance. And I grew up as a Hawthorn supporter and I love Lee Matthews. And I've seen a lot of his football, but Duck did things that I've never seen people do on a consistent basis, against some great defenders too during that period. I don't have the words, I have no new words to describe the way that he's been described by many people.
What was the most exhilarating moment or day or event in your time at North Melbourne?
30 minutes after that 96 grand final siren. It's the realisation of a dream. There's a raw emotion of 21 teammates and a couple of unlucky teammates. But for that 30-minute period, you're on the AFL's equivalent of Mount Everest, and everything else and everyone else is irrelevant. And you can sit back and savour in the moment. 27 years of hard work had gone into that. For me personally, the reward, the satisfaction, and then I think the other thing that stays with me today, and I was talking about this recently, the Shinboner spirit is something synonymous with that football club. And I finally understood what that really meant in its rawest sense when we went back to Arden Street that night. And you would have a 5-year-old kid or an 87-year-old person, tears running down their eyes, and a person who's closer to the end than they are to the finish puts their hand on your shoulder and said, "Thank you. I can now go to the greener pastures, a really happy person."
Okay, let's move up to Sydney. You played with Tony Lockett.
Yep.
Another captivating figure, isn't he?
And misunderstood. It's funny when you go to when you play football against certain players, you have this preconceived idea. I was so far wrong with Plugger. I've never met a more meticulous, determined trainer than Tony Lockett for a bloke of his size. Hated making mistakes, perfectionist, trained really well. Given his size and given his standing in the game, could have been allowed a few luxuries or, not have to do everything, but when he was out in the training track, he would want to hit every single pass. And what I found mildly amusing over the journey of playing with Plugger was just before the Rocket would give the final pre-game speech, we'd go to walk out, we'd be getting ready to run out, and he'd just quietly come up in his very unassuming, almost embarrassing way, embarrassed about, this is a guy who's one of the greats.
We're talking Plugger.
Tony Lockett.
Yeah.
But had doubts. So the greatest ever goal scorer had a few doubts. He'd walk up nearly every game and he'd just quietly grab me and go, "Listen, if you get one early, can you just look after the big fella?" I'd go, "Mate, it's been noted." I'd walk away and go, "Mate, that's unbelievable. How's this superstar asking me if we can give him a good start?" But I love that.
Yeah.
The public, Tony Lockett is not the private Tony Lockett.
You're a boy from Warrnambool?
Yep.
There was a period early in your life, and I remember this, I was just thinking this morning about your story, where you seemed to go missing during a footy season and you were found in hospital.
Yep.
Do we know the full story about then?
Yeah.
What happened?
Are you talking the 95, after the 95 prelim final against Carlton?
Yes.
Yep. I've had this question asked a lot. I don't really care whether or not people believe it, but if it needs to be verified, you can go to Harry Younglick. I had food poisoning the week leading up to that Carlton game. There was serious doubt whether or not I'd play. I had Harry come over to the house I was sharing with Matthew Armstrong in Northcote during the day of the game, and had a number of injections. And it was very close to whether or not I would play or not. Played the game out, went straight to hospital because I had my stomach, the lining of my stomach started to have complications.
Because there were some exotic theories about what had happened.
And this is probably what annoys me the most about the fact that you play a very public game, is that people make these comments up, such as the industry that starts to grow legs, and because a lot of people say it, then it's obviously true.
The allegation, let's be specific.
Drug taking.
Yeah. So more recently, Justin Kosicki famously said that he hadn't enjoyed a game of footy for a long time. Maybe we're drawing the wrong conclusions from this, but it was sad, I think, for someone, because he spent so much time in footy, for him to publicly declare that there was little joy in the game for him. How did you interpret it?
I think I can't speak for Justin. I admire it because he was very frank and honest, but that's who he is. But I would suspect that Justin's probably said that because he's closer to the end. But if that was someone who was at the beginning of their career or halfway through the career, I wouldn't mind betting that they wouldn't say it because they'd be worried about losing opportunities and how it might be perceived. But I think that it would be... Ignorant might be a too strong a word, but I think we'd be foolish to think that there aren't players, even though they are incredibly well paid, doing something that is unbelievably fantastic when everything's going well, that don't find enjoyment in it. I mean, this is a very demanding business. They make enormous sacrifices, and so they should, because they get really well compensated. But this is cutthroat. We pick them up and we spit them out very quickly. It's uncompromising. It's all judged on results. And what I'd like to see an adjustment. We treat the physical recovery of injuries better than any sport in this country, and we'll probably lead the world in many ways. I think that as a sport we do it so well. From the time the injury occurs to the time they start running to the time they'll resume playing if everything goes well, it's documented to the minute. And we've got the best medicos in the country, if not around the world. But there's still, in my opinion, too much focus on the athlete and not enough focus on the individual. We've got to make sure, and this is a philosophical shift, and maybe I'm just the minority, but our most important resources in our game today are the people. Mm-hmm. And the athletes can follow the people, but we've got to make sure that it's not just treating the knee, we're helping the individual to make sure that they're working their way through and they're emotionally well balanced and adjusted.
So you said people, do you mean players?
Players.
Players, okay. In that interview we did in 2006, you said that an AFL Players Association survey showed that 8% of the player group had either made inquiries about psychological problems or sought counselling.
Yep.
Now, where do you think that's at now?
Well, let's just use that as the point for the conversation. That's 8% that we knew of. Mm-hmm. I'd suspect there'd be more.
So you were one who... You wouldn't have been in that 8%,
I'd
would
lie.
you? No.
I would have lied.
Yeah.
And I'll bet my last dollar that there are players making the same decisions because they're worried about losing the opportunities.
So you probably don't know this, but you're among the top 100 players in the history of the VFL AFL in terms of games, and you're in the top 35 for Brownlow vote winners. That's why I've changed my mind. I didn't realise, I didn't do my homework. I didn't realise you were such a gun. But I mean, they are very, very nice stats to have to support your career, are they not?
It is what it is. It's not for me to tell people how they should view my career. Ultimately,
good point. Good,
bad or otherwise, it is what it is. I'm satisfied.
Well, let me tell you, it's a great career. No, I mean that. I'm prepared to say I probably didn't value you as much as I should have when you were playing. But a premiership, 3 best and fairest, 2 clubs that you served very well. And I must say, I'm full of admiration for your bravery about depression in your own case and for the greater good of those in the community similarly afflicted. So, Swat, it's been a pleasure to see you and good luck for the future.
I appreciate it, mate. Thanks. Good on you, mate.
This has been a Fox Footy production for Fox Sports.